My brother-in-law confessed to being in love with my wife. When she came home, she brought it up, and during the conversation, her phone was constantly ringing with calls and texts from him. I told her to answer and put it on speaker so I could listen. He was crying, begging her not to tell my sister. Apparently, during the weekend when we were all together, he thought my wife was flirting with him and claimed they shared a moment when they were alone in the kitchen. My wife can be sarcastic and a bit harsh, which I suppose could be misinterpreted as flirting. He asked if she had told me, to which I responded, yes, since I was on speaker. He then started pleading with me. My main concern was whether he had cheated on my sister before, and he swore he hadn't, promising on his kids' lives. He said it was only my wife and that I should understand. At that point, I was done listening and told him I wasn't going to act right then, but would call him the next day. My wife urged me to go over immediately and tell my sister, but the thought of destroying my sister's family was gut-wrenching. Thinking about how it would affect my nieces made me feel sick. I knew the right thing to do was to tell my sister, but I also had my wife to think about. It wasn't her fault, yet I worried about how my family might hold it against her. Even if my sister chose not to divorce him, the dynamic between us would never be the same. In the end, my wife was right. I should have told my sister immediately. Late that night, I received a call from my sister. She said she had something to tell me, that my wife had tried to start an affair with her husband. He had turned the situation around and blamed her. I told her that wasn't the case at all, and I was on my way. I called my parents, woke them up, and explained the situation. Then, I woke up my younger brother and informed him as well. My parents headed over to my sister's house to stay with her kids, while my brother came to our house to watch ours. My wife and I left for my sister's. When we arrived, my sister was sitting on the porch with my brother-in-law, who looked defeated. He knew we had the texts and voicemails, so I'm not sure what he hoped to accomplish. My wife handed her phone to my sister, who read the messages and listened to the voicemails. Before she could say anything, my brother-in-law broke down sobbing. It was a shocking sight, since he's a firefighter, a big tough guy. But my sister is tough too. She told him to stop, pack a bag and leave, because she couldn't stand to look at him. He continued begging, but she had no patience for it and walked off to talk with my wife. I saw them hug, which gave me some relief. They've been friends since college, and I met my wife through my sister, so their bond is strong. I'd been worried that this situation might ruin their friendship. I was left with my brother-in-law, and though I felt more sympathy than anger, he kept apologizing, saying he couldn't help himself. He mentioned how easy it was to fall in love with my wife, and while I understood to some extent, it was still hard to process. Eventually, he picked himself up and left. We stayed there all night. My sister began asking my wife why her husband thought any of this could work out. He had to believe she felt the same way for some reason. My wife, now in tears, insisted there was nothing more to it. She gave my sister her phone again, and they went through every text from the past 2 years. There was nothing suspicious, just the playful banter my wife is known for. She's the same way with my mom and younger brother. The only thing she could think of was the moment in the kitchen last weekend that he mentioned. They both reached for the fridge at the same time and playfully jostled for who would get there first. He let her win, but as he reached around her waist to grab a beer, he did it in a way that felt inappropriate. My wife admitted she felt uncomfortable at the time and regretted not calling him out on it. She didn't want to make it a big deal, but now thinks that by staying silent, she might have given him false hope. Thankfully, my sister didn't blame her, so that was a relief. Then, my sister started searching through his MacBook, angry and frantic, trying to uncover anything else she didn't know about. She guessed his password, started digging around, and found a lot of pictures of my wife. They went back years and were all focused solely on her. We had taken a trip as couples to the Caribbean a few years ago, and my wife, who doesn't usually wear a bikini, wore one since it was an adults-only resort. He had secretly snapped about 50 photos of her in that bikini. At this point, things were getting creepy, and I started wondering if this crossed into restraining order territory. Unfortunately, The mess didn't end there. My sister agreed to sit down with him one night and let him explain. She put my wife on FaceTime during the conversation to make sure there was no lying. He confessed to being obsessed with my wife, and I listened in from off camera while my sister recorded the entire conversation. He admitted that his obsession started the day he met her, back when my wife and I were dating. In fact, he had met her before he even met me, since my sister introduced him to her friends, including my wife, before I was in the picture. At first, he thought it was just a physical attraction, but over time, he realized it was more. My sister was ready to kick him out right there, but decided to hear him out a bit longer. She asked him what made him think my wife would ever leave me for him. His response was that he believed there was mutual attraction and thought it would start as an affair and eventually turn into something more. At that point, both my wife and sister exploded. There was a lot of yelling, cursing, and frustration. My wife ended the call because she was shaken and distraught, worried about how I was feeling. She reassured me that the attraction was entirely one-sided. I never thought there was anything to worry about. Even if she found him physically attractive, I knew she would never act on it. Early in our relationship, she caught me admiring her while she was getting dressed. She asked if I liked what I saw, then her face turned serious and she warned me not to screw up, or I'd never get the chance again. She meant it. She's very serious about trust. I always knew my brother-in-law was a bit cocky, but I had no idea he thought so highly of himself that he'd try something like this. I later spoke with my sister, who is contacting a lawyer to see what steps she can take to limit his access to their kids. From her perspective, he's completely detached from reality. A few weeks passed, and my brother-in-law returned home, not because my sister wants him back, but because legally she can't stop him for now. They're done, and I think he's starting to realize that. The lawyer told my sister that given his recent behavior has been documented, there's a good chance she'll be granted full custody. He doesn't even seem interested in fighting her on that. My sister will be fine. Any love she had for him is gone, and she doesn't appear to be heartbroken over it. The kids don't know what's going on yet, but my brother-in-law was never around much anyway. He spent a lot of nights sleeping at the fire station and working overtime, but when they find out, it will still be tough on them. Initially, we thought there might be other women, but as far as we can tell, that's not the case. It's just this bizarre obsession he developed with my wife. She blocked his phone, but the night he came home, he created a new email account and sent her a message. It started with an apology, but quickly took a creepy turn. He went on and on about the things he loves about my wife and how desperation drove him to act the way he did. He talked about the supposed mutual attraction and the sexual tension he believed was always there. He ended the email with a long rant about me, making it clear he doesn't think much of me or my ability to satisfy my wife. We forwarded the email to my sister, who will share it with her lawyer. It might be enough to finally get him removed from the house. My wife isn't in the best place emotionally, but she's getting better every day. She blames herself for being too comfortable around him. Normally, she's very careful about setting boundaries with men, but with him, she felt safe since he was family. She never imagined he'd cross any lines. Thankfully, she and my sister are still on good terms, with no resentment between them, which is a relief. We'll all be okay. It's just going to take time.